The CEO grabbed the wrench out of Ethan Carter's hand and threw it across the parking lot. "You drive this garbage onto my campus in front of my investors." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just reached past her, opened the driver's door of that rusted '89 pickup and turned the key. What came out of that hood wasn't an engine. It was thunder. 300 people went silent at once. A glass of champagne shattered on a caterer's tray. And the woman who'd just called him garbage would spend the next 30 seconds realizing her family had spent 20 years trying to bury the man standing in front of her. Before we go on, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe a man's worth isn't parked in his driveway, subscribe and stay with me to the end. The truck was already loud before it ever roared. Not the engine, the truck. The 1989 Ford F-25. Faded from red to something closer to dried clay. One fender held on with a bracket. Ethan Carter had welded himself at 2 a.m, 11 years ago. It was loud, the way a wrong answer is loud. It sat in the far corner of the Halloran Dynamics employee lot every single morning at 5:40, surrounded by leased German sedans and electric crossovers with dealer plates still on them, and it said something about the man who drove it that everybody thought they already understood. Ethan was 58. He wore the same gray coveralls every day, with Carter stitched over the pocket in white thread that had gone the color of old teeth. He carried a thermos, not a coffee cup. He came in early, and he left late, and he did not talk much, and in a building full of people who were paid to talk, that made him invisible in the particular way that only quiet men become invisible. He liked it that way. That was the whole point. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning, Ruth." Ruth Delgado ran the front desk and had for 19 years, which made her the only other person in the building who remembered what it looked like before the glass. She slid a visitor log toward him without looking up. "You seen the tent they put up out back?" "I put up the tent out back." "Right." She snorted. "Course you did. You know what it cost?" "I don't want to know." $84,000, Ethan, for a tent." She finally looked up. For one day. He capped his thermos. "It's a nice tent." "It's a tent." "It's a nice one, though." She laughed, and he almost smiled, and he went down the hall toward the shop with his keys jangling on his belt the way they had every morning for 6 years. Here is what the badge said. Ethan Carter Facilities Maintenance. 2. Here is what that meant in practice. It meant when the HVAC in the clean lab dropped 2 degrees at 3 a.m. His phone rang. It meant when the backup generator hiccuped during the storm last February and $11 million of lithium cells almost cooked themselves. He was the one who drove in through 8 inches of slush and got it stabilized before the on-call engineer had his shoes on. It meant when a 26-year-old with a master's degree from Michigan couldn't figure out why the vibration test rig kept throwing garbage data. Ethan walked past, listened for 4 seconds and said, "Your isolator mounts are torqued wrong. Somebody did 'em by feel," and walked on, and he was right. And the kid never thanked him, and Ethan never expected him to. It meant he was furniture. Good furniture. Load-bearing furniture. But furniture, that was fine. Furniture didn't get its picture taken. Furniture didn't get Googled. His daughter Maddie was 17 and had opinions about the truck. "Dad, Dad." "I hear you." "Sarah's mom drives a Tahoe. It has a screen." "This has a screen." He tapped the windshield. "Big one. Best resolution on the market." "Oh my God. Look at that picture quality." "I'm walking. I'm gonna walk to school." "It's 4 miles. I'll build character. You'll build shin splints." He pulled out of the driveway, and the engine did what it always did in the cold. Nothing dramatic, just a low, even breathing that Maddie had heard her whole life and had never once thought about the way you never think about your own heartbeat. "Buckle up." She buckled up. She was quiet for a mile. Then, "Kayla's dad said you're a janitor." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Kayla's dad is close." He said it like it was a bad thing. Yeah, well. He put his blinker on. Kayla's dad sells insurance and he's 40 pounds overweight and his kid's a bully, so I'd take his read on the world with a grain of salt. Dad, I'm just saying, honey, everybody's grading everybody. Everybody's got a clipboard. He glanced at her. Trick is figuring out whose clipboard you actually care about. Whose do you care about? He didn't answer right away. Then he said yours and your mother's. Maddie looked out the window. She was 17, and she was still learning how to hold that sentence without dropping it. Mom's been gone 6 years. Yeah, Ethan said. She still grades me every day. The event was called Ignite. That was the actual name. It was on banners. It was on a step and repeat wall. It was on 120 branded water bottles that Ethan personally carried in from a truck at 6:15 that morning, 2 cases at a time, while a young man with a headset told him to be careful with them because they were the good ones. By noon, the campus looked like a car commercial. Media risers, catering, a local news van, and 2 national ones. 41 investors, 3 congressional staffers, a man from the Department of Energy, who kept checking his watch, and roughly 200 employees who'd been strongly encouraged to attend and applaud. And in the middle of it, on a stage lit like a Broadway show, stood Vivian Halloran. She was 34 years old. She had been CEO for 14 months. She had inherited the chair from her father, the way you inherit a boat. You didn't build it, you didn't earn it, but everyone still calls you captain, and after a while you start to believe them. She was, and this is the part that mattered, not stupid. That was the tragedy of her. A stupid woman would have been easier. Vivian Halloran had a genuine mind, a real appetite for the work, and an absolute inability to imagine that the important people in a room might not be the ones in front of the microphone. And that's why, she said, and the room leaned in. Halloran doesn't chase the future. We build it. Ladies and gentlemen, the H9 platform. The screen behind her lit up. Applause. Ethan was 50 feet away on one knee, fixing a cable ramp that some genius had laid crooked so that the camera dolly kept catching on it. He heard the phrase, the H9 platform, and something in his shoulders changed. Just slightly. Just the way a man's shoulders change when someone says a name he used to know. He kept working. Ethan? Ruth found him behind the catering tent an hour later. You need to move your truck. Why? Because Deb from Comms says the B-roll crew is doing exterior shots at 2, and your truck's in frame. It's in the employee lot. I know it's in the employee lot. That's what the employee lot is for Ruth. I know, Ethan. I'm just the messenger. Don't you look at me like that. She sighed. She used the word optics. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. He was very calm. He was almost always very calm. It was the thing about him that people found either soothing or infuriating, depending on how much they had to lose that day. Where am I supposed to put it? There's overflow across Bridger Road. That's half a mile. Yeah. In February. Yeah. He looked at her a long moment. Then he nodded once and said, okay. Because it was easier and because he had learned somewhere along the line that dignity is not the same thing as winning arguments. He'd have moved it too. That's the thing people get wrong when they tell this story later. He would have moved it. He never got the chance. At 2:14 p.m., the B-roll crew was set up on the north walk with the tent and the glass tower behind them, and about 300 people milling in the frame because Comms wanted energy, not a press conference. At 2:15, Vivian Halloran came down off the stage, still wearing her lapel mic. Nobody told her it was still live. That detail is going to matter. She was buzzing. She'd nailed it. 2 investors had already pulled her aside. The DOE man had stopped checking his watch. She was 34, and she was winning, and she was walking backward through her own party with a champagne flute she hadn't touched, talking to her CFO, Marcus Reed, a man of 52, whose entire job that day was to laugh at the right times. And did you see Halberd's face? Did you see it? I saw it. He's in. He's in, Marcus. I could smell it. She turned around, and there in the exact center of the shot, 100 feet behind her, under a bare tree, parked crooked, because the lines were faded, sat a rust-colored 1989 Ford F250 with a bracket welded to the fender and a spiderweb crack in the corner of the windshield. Vivian stopped walking. "What," she said, "is that?" Marcus followed her eyes. I think that's one of the maintenance guys." "On camera?" "Well, Marcus, that is on camera. That is in frame. I have Halberd Capital standing 40 feet from a tetanus shot." A couple of executives nearby laughed. It was a small laugh, a courtesy laugh, but it did what laughs do. It told her she was on to something. "Get somebody to move it. I'll find out whose. I don't want to find out whose, I want it gone." And that's when Ethan Carter walked into the frame. He wasn't going to the truck. He was going to the generator shed behind it, because the tense power was pulling more than the temporary panel liked, and he'd been watching that reading all morning. He had a wrench in his hand. He had a coil of cable over his shoulder. He was walking the way he always walked, which was unhurried, and he did not know he was walking into the rest of his life. Somebody said, "That's him. That's Carter." Vivian turned. Here's what she saw. A man in gray coveralls. Gray hair cut too short, probably by himself or his kid. A face like a barn door, weathered plain, giving away nothing. Boots that had been resoled. A wedding ring on a chain around his neck instead of on his finger, because you don't wear rings around rotating machinery. But she didn't know that, and to her it just looked like a small, sad affectation. She saw a man who had done nothing with his life. She was 34, and she had never once in her life been wrong about a person in a way that cost her anything, and so she opened her mouth. Hey you." Ethan stopped. "Ma'am? That your truck?" 300 people were now watching, because that is what a crowd does. The B-roll camera was rolling because nobody had said cut. 2 phones came up, then 5, then 20. "Yes, ma'am." "You drive this garbage?" And she laughed. She actually laughed when she said it. A bright, easy laugh, the laugh of a woman who thinks she's being charming. The laugh of a woman who has never had to consider the possibility that the joke lands on a person instead of bouncing off them. The crowd laughed with her. That's the part Ethan would think about later. Not her. Them. 200 people he'd fixed the heat for. 200 people whose coffee machine he'd unclogged, and whose parking gate he'd rebuilt, and whose lab he'd kept at 68 degrees through a blackout. They laughed. Ethan didn't move. "I mean, look at it," Vivian said, warming up now, half turning to her audience the way a comic turns to a room. "I have reporters here. I have the Department of Energy here. And there's what is that, a tractor? Is that a farm implement?" More laughter. Marcus Reed, to his eternal credit, said quietly, "Viv." She didn't hear him. "Sir, I'm serious. I'll write you a check right now. What's it worth? $400, 5. She actually reached toward her jacket like she was going for a checkbook, and the crowd howled and someone in the back yelled, "200!" And that got the biggest laugh of the day. Ethan stood there with a wrench in his hand and a coil of cable on his shoulder, and he looked at her. And then he said in a voice so level it made the front row uncomfortable, "Ma'am, that truck's not for sale. Everything's for sale." "No, ma'am." Something flickered across her face, just a flicker. The laughter was still going, but he had said "no, ma'am," the way a man says it when he's not scared of you. And Vivian Halloran had gone 14 months without hearing that sound. She should have stopped there. "Look," she said, and her voice changed, sharpened, dropped. The comedy went to the place her father's voice used to go. "I don't care what it means to you. Okay? This is a company. There are 400 jobs here. There are people whose mortgages depend on what those men over there think of us in the next 90 minutes. And you're standing in the middle of my shot with a rust bucket because, what sentiment nostalgia? It's not nostalgia. Then move it." "I was going to." "Then why haven't you?" "Because I was fixing your power, ma'am." And there, right there, was the moment the whole thing could have turned. If she'd heard it. If she'd heard the word "your." She didn't. "You know what?" Vivian said. "Give me the keys." The crowd went quiet. "Ma'am? Give me the keys. I'll move it myself. Somebody's gotta." "That's not gonna happen." "Excuse me. I said that's not gonna happen." Still level, still calm. But the calm had thickened into something you could feel in your chest. "You want it moved, I'll move it. But you're not putting your hands on it." And Vivian Halloran, 34 years old, 14 months in the chair writing the biggest morning of her career with 200 people watching and cameras rolling, and a lapel mic she'd forgotten was hot, reached out and took the wrench out of his hand. She just took it and threw it. It sailed maybe 40 feet and hit the asphalt with a clang that everyone in that parking lot would hear again in their sleep for the rest of their lives. The laughing stopped. Not gradually. All at once. The way a room goes quiet when a glass breaks. Because there is a line and everyone in a crowd knows exactly where it is, even if the person crossing it doesn't. And she had just gone from making a joke about a truck to taking a tool out of a working man's hand and throwing it on the ground, and every single person out there felt their stomach drop. Marcus Reed said, "Vivian," out loud this time. Ruth Delgado, 90 feet away by the door, put a hand over her mouth. And Ethan Carter looked at his empty hand for about 2 seconds. "Batida." He didn't yell. That's what nobody was ready for. He set the coil of cable down on the ground gently, the way you set down something that isn't yours. He straightened up, and then he looked at Vivian Halloran, really looked at her for the first time, and she felt it land like a hand on her sternum, because there was no anger in it at all. There was pity. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't know what you just did." I moved a conversation along. "My wife built that truck." Silence. Her name was Grace. His voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It just got quieter, which was worse. "She spent the last 4 years of her life on what's under that hood. She died on a Tuesday in March, and I finished it alone in a garage, and it has never left my hands since. And you just called it garbage in front of 300 people, and then you took my wrench and you threw it." Vivian's mouth was open. Nothing came out. "So no," Ethan said. "You can't have the keys." He walked past her. He walked to the truck. And every eye in that parking lot followed him, and the B-roll camera swung around and tracked him the whole way because the operator had the good instinct to know something was happening. And the phones came up 40-50 of them now, and somewhere in the back, a young engineer named Priya Raghavan, 29. 3 years out of MIT, was recording on her phone and had no idea she was about to capture the video that would break the internet in 9 hours. Ethan opened the door. It groaned. Of course it groaned. He got in. He put the key in. And he paused. And this is the detail Priya's video caught, the one that got 14 million loops on its own. He paused with his hand on the key, and he looked up through the cracked windshield. At nothing, and his lips moved, and later people would freeze frame it and lip read it, and argue about it in the comments for years. And the closest anybody ever got was, "Sorry, Gracie." Somebody in the crowd chuckled, a nervous chuckle, a let's get this over with chuckle, waiting for the sad little cough of a 37-year-old engine turning over. Ethan turned the key. There is a sound a V8 makes. Everybody knows it. It's a good sound. It's a familiar sound. It's the sound of a country. This was not that sound. The first thing that happened was that everyone felt it in their feet. Before there was any noise at all, a full half second before 300 people felt the asphalt move under their shoes. Not shake. Move. Like something enormous had rolled over in its sleep underneath the parking lot. Then it came up through the ground into their legs, into their chests, and the champagne flute in Vivian Halloran's hand rang like a tuning fork, a clean high hum, and then a caterer's tray 30 feet away lost every glass on it at once, a bright shattering crash that nobody heard, because by then the sound had arrived. And it wasn't a roar, not the way a truck roars. It was lower than that. It was cleaner than that. It was a note, one single, continuous, impossible note, like a cathedral organ the size of a building, like a jet at 100 feet, like a storm that had learned to hold a chord. It didn't rattle. It didn't miss. It didn't do any of the thousand small ugly things that an internal combustion engine does 800 times a second. It was smooth in a way that made your teeth ache, and it kept going, and it kept going, and it was so far outside what anybody standing there had ever heard from a machine that the human brain had nowhere to put it. Somebody screamed, not in fear, in pure animal shock. 140 birds came off the roofline of the building at once, all together black against the gray sky. A car alarm went off, then 8, then the whole lot, and the note held. That's what broke them. Not the volume, the steadiness. Every engineer on that lawn, and there were 60 of them, understood in the same instant that they were listening to something with no reciprocating mass. No pistons, no firing order, no power stroke. Nothing going up and down and back and forth and pretending to be smooth. Something that just turned. Dr. Alan Voss, 66 years old, 41 years in propulsion, chief scientist of Halloran Dynamics, was standing next to the DOE man with a plate of shrimp in his hand. He dropped the plate. He didn't notice he'd dropped it. He said out loud to nobody, in a voice like a man watching the dead walk. That's not possible, the DOE man said. Alan, what is it? And Voss took 2 steps forward, and his face had gone completely white, and he said, that's the Carter cycle. Marcus Reed turned. The what? That's the Carter cycle. Voss's voice cracked wide open. That's no. That's the Carter cycle. That engine doesn't exist. That engine was never built. That's, oh my God. And he turned around and he looked at Vivian Halloran, and his whole body was shaking, and he said the sentence that ended her life as she'd known it. Vivian, what is that man's name? She was still holding the ringing champagne flute. Her ears were full of that impossible sustained note. Her mind was completely blessedly empty for one more second. Carter, she said. His name's Carter. Voss put both hands on top of his head. His name is Carter, he repeated. You just called Ethan Carter's engine garbage. The note held. The birds circled. 60 phones filmed. And through the cracked windshield of a rusted 1989 Ford F-25. A 58-year-old maintenance man sat with both hands on the wheel and his jaw clenched and tears running straight down his face, listening to his wife's heartbeat for the first time in front of the world. The note ran for 11 seconds. Nobody moved for 8 of them. Then Ethan Carter turned the key back, and the sound didn't stop the way engines stop. It didn't sputter down or cough or die. It just descended smooth as a hand lowering one long clean glide from that impossible chord down into nothing. And then there was silence so complete that a woman in the 3rd row of the crowd could be heard whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," over and over like she'd forgotten she was doing it. Car alarms went on shrieking across the lot. Nobody turned them off. Nobody thought of it. Ethan sat in the cab with both hands still on the wheel. Outside, Dr. Alan Voss was walking toward the truck like a man crossing ice. Alan? Marcus Reed grabbed his arm. Alan, what did you just say? Let go of me. You said a name. I said, let go of me, Marcus. Voss shook him off and kept going. And behind him, 300 people stood frozen in a parking lot, with their phones up and their faces slack, and Vivian Halloran was still holding a champagne flute that had a hairline crack running from the rim to the stem. At 2:19 p.m., Dr. Alan Voss reached the driver's door of a rusted 1989 Ford F250 and put his hand flat on the sheet metal like he was checking a body for a pulse. He looked up through the window. Sir, he said. Sir, please, would you get out of the vehicle? Ethan didn't look at him. I'd like to go home. Sir, Voss's voice broke apart. He was 66 years old, and he had testified before Congress twice, and he could not get a full sentence out. Sir, my name is Alan Voss. I'm the chief scientist here. I've read every paper you ever published. I've read the ones you didn't publish. I have a copy of your dissertation in my office, and it is underlined, sir. It is underlined on almost every page, and I have been telling people for 20 years that you were the most important propulsion mind of your generation. And they told me, You were dead. Ethan's jaw worked once. I'm not dead. No, sir. Voss laughed, and it came out wrong, half a sob. No, sir, you are certainly not. I'd like to go home, Dr. Voss. Sir, that engine is my wife's. Sir. Voss put both hands on the window frame. I have spent 41 years of my life on rotary detonation. 41 years. I have been told by everybody who signs my checks that what I just heard is thermodynamically impossible, and I believe them because I couldn't do it either. And you just did it in a farm truck in a parking lot on a Thursday. Ethan finally turned his head, and what Voss saw in that man's face was not triumph. There was no triumph anywhere in it. It was the face of somebody who'd just been made to say his wife's name out loud to strangers. Then you know what it costs, Ethan said, and he started the truck again, that low, clean, impossible breathing, and Voss actually stepped back, actually flinched, and he backed out of the space and drove out through the front gate at 15 miles an hour past 200 people who parted for him without being asked. And the guard at the gate, a kid named Dominic, 22 years old, snapped to attention and saluted, which he had never done in his life and could never afterward explain. The truck turned onto Bridger Road and was gone. And Vivian Halloran was standing in the middle of her own parking lot with a broken glass in her hand, and 40 investors behind her, and every phone in Ohio pointed at the back of her head. At 2:24, Marcus Reed said the only useful sentence anybody said that day. Viv, get inside, right now. She didn't move. Vivian. He took her elbow. Inside. At 2:31 p.m., the door of the fourth-floor conference room closed, and Vivian Halloran said, "Somebody tell me what just happened." Nobody answered. There were 6 of them in that room. Marcus Reed, Alan Voss, who had not stopped shaking, Deb Whitlock from Communications, who had her phone in both hands and was staring at it like it was a live grenade, General Counsel, a careful man named Paul Ito, Head of HR, Renee Salazar, and Vivian standing at the head of a table she suddenly could not remember sitting down at. "Somebody, tell me." 240,000, Deb said. "What? Views? On the first one. It's been 9 minutes." The room went very quiet. 9 minutes, Vivian repeated. "There's 4 videos. The best one's from an employee phone. It's got the whole thing. It's got audio." Deb swallowed. "It's got your mic, Vivian. Your lapel was hot. The house sound picked it up, and it's clean as a studio recording. Every word." "Which words?" "All of them." "Which words, Deb?" Deb looked up. "You drive this garbage." Marcus closed his eyes. "And the wrench," Deb said. "The wrench is in frame." Vivian put her hands on the back of a chair. Her knuckles went white. "Okay," she said. "Okay. It's a bad optics moment. We've had bad optics moments." "Vivian." Voss's voice came out of the corner like something dragged over gravel. "Stop talking about optics." "Alan, stop talking about optics." He stood up. He was a small man, 66 cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on his head, and every person in that room turned to look at him because they had never once heard him raise his voice. "You are worried about a video. I am telling you that a man just drove out of your parking lot with a functioning rotary detonation engine in a 1989 pickup truck, and you called it garbage on a hot mic." "I didn't know." "I know you didn't know, that's the problem." "Alan?" Marcus started. No, Marcus. She's going to hear this. She's going to hear it right now while there's still a chance. Voss came around the table. "Vivian, sit down, please. I'm asking you as somebody who worked for your father for 26 years. Sit down." She sat down. "What did I just hear?" she said. Voss took his glasses off his head and set them on the table like he needed both hands free. "Every engine in the world runs on a subsonic flame," he said. "You inject fuel, you light it, it burns it, pushes a piston, or spins a turbine. It's a controlled fire. We've been doing it for 150 years, and we've squeezed maybe every last drop out of it there is. Are you with me?" "Yes. There's another way. It's called detonation. Instead of burning the fuel, you shock it. You run a detonation wave around a ring continuously thousands of times a second. and the wave itself does the compression for you. No pistons, no compressor stages, almost nothing moving. He looked at her. It's 25 to 30% more efficient than anything on this planet. On the same fuel. It's not an improvement, Vivian. It's a different century. Then why doesn't everyone? Because nobody can do it. Voss's hands came up. Because the wave tears itself apart. Because you cannot hold it. NASA can't hold it. The Air Force has been throwing money at it since I had hair, and they get it stable for 4 seconds in a lab, and then it eats the test article. Every rig in the world sounds like a shotgun going off in a trash can, and I have listened to all of them, and what I heard in that parking lot did not waver. He leaned on the table. It did not waver, Vivian, for 11 seconds, in a truck, in the cold, on pump gas. Nobody breathed. How much? Marcus said. What? How much is it worth? Voss laughed. It was the most frightening sound Vivian had ever heard. Marcus, You're asking the wrong... He stopped. He rubbed his face with both hands. The commercial aviation retrofit market alone is $50 billion. Grid peaker plants. Marine, long haul. Defense, God defense. You want a number for the license, the patent estate. He shrugged with his whole body. $2 billion. $2 billion is conservative. $2 billion is what you'd pay if you didn't understand what you were buying. Paul Ito, General Counsel, spoke for the first time. Who owns it? And that right there was the first crack. Because Voss didn't answer. He stood there with his hands on the table, and he didn't answer, and something moved behind his eyes that everybody in that room saw. And Vivian Halloran, who was many things but was never stupid, sat forward. Alan? Vivian. Alan, who owns it? I'd like to speak to you alone. Who owns it? At 2:46 p.m., Alan Voss sat down heavily in a chair he hadn't chosen and said, You need to look up a project called Meridian. Marcus said, Never heard of it. You wouldn't have. It was before your time. It was before most people's time. Voss's eyes were on the table. 1998 to 2004. It was Halloran's Advanced Concepts program. It had a building. It had 41 people. It had a budget that would make you sick. And then it didn't. Vivian said, What does that mean? It means one day there was a program and the next day there wasn't, and everybody who worked on it signed something. Voss looked up. I signed something. Alan. I signed something. Vivian and I have kept it for 22 years, and I'm about to break it. And I want you to understand that I am doing that because I think if I don't, this company is going to do the exact same thing it did the first time. Vivian's mouth had gone completely dry. Who ran Meridian? Your father ran the company. A man named Gerald Vane ran Meridian. And who worked on it? Voss looked at her for a long, long moment. 2 people mostly, he said. A 29-year-old propulsion physicist out of Michigan named Ethan Carter. The room tilted. And his wife, Voss said. A combustion chemist named Grace Carter. And Vivian. I want to be very clear about something before you go any further. She was the better of the two. At 3:02, Vivian Halloran was alone in her office with the door locked and her hands flat on her desk, breathing like she'd run somewhere. Her phone had 81 notifications. She turned it face down. Then she turned it back over because she couldn't not, and the top one was from her father's old assistant, and it said, Only call me. Do not talk to anyone. Do not put anything in writing. Vivian looked at that message for a long time. Then she did the single bravest thing she had ever done in her life, which was that she did not call him. At 3:15, she was in the archive. It was in the basement of the old building, the one nobody used, the one Ethan Carter kept at 68 degrees and 40% humidity for 6 years, without anybody ever asking him why he bothered. There was a woman down there named Charlotte, 71 years old, part-time 3 days a week, who had worked for Halloran since 1979. She looked up when Vivian came in. Well, Charlotte said, that took less time than I figured. Vivian stopped dead. Excuse me. You want Meridian? Charlotte took her glasses off. Honey, I've been waiting 22 years for somebody to walk down those stairs and say that word. How did you? I heard the truck. Charlotte's chin came up. Everybody heard the truck. I'm old, I'm not deaf. She stood. Row 9. It's not in the system. It was never in the system. It's boxes. How many boxes? 61. At 3:40 p.m., Vivian Halloran was sitting on the concrete floor of an archive, with her jacket off and her sleeves pushed up and a box open in her lap. The first thing she found was a photograph. 41 people in front of a hangar. She recognized her father immediately, younger, thick, dark hair, hands on his hips, that grin. And there in the second row, tall and lean and about 30 years old, was a man she'd have walked past on any street in America, except that she'd seen that exact face 2 hours ago, looking at her with pity through the window of a truck. He was laughing in the photograph. That was the thing that stopped her. He was laughing. Head back, mouth open, absolutely gone with it. One arm around a small, dark-haired woman, who was making a face at whoever was holding the camera. Vivian turned it over. Meridian Team, August 2001. Ethan won the bet. Grace is never going to let him forget it. She looked at that photograph for 4 full minutes. Then she opened box 2. At 4:20 she found the test logs. At 4:55 she found the first internal memo, and her hands started shaking. At 5:30 she found the second one, and had to put it down and walk to the end of the row and stand there with her forehead against a shelf. At 6:15 she called Alan Voss and said 4 words in a voice he did not recognize. Get down here, now. At 6:31 p.m., Voss came around the end of row 9 and found the CEO of Halloran Dynamics sitting on the floor surrounded by paper in a rough circle like a woman in the middle of a burned house. Vivian, sit down. I don't... Sit down, Alan. He sat down on an overturned crate. She held up a page. March 14th, 2003. Meridian Test Article 9. Sustained detonation, 22 seconds, 91% theoretical. She looked up. Is that good? Voss made a sound. Alan, is that good? That's the most important 22 seconds in the history of propulsion, he said hoarsely. And it never happened. Vivian, I'm telling you that never happened. I was on this campus and I never... It happened. She held up another page. This is the internal review, signed by Gerald Vane. He calls it, quote, a fundamental threat to the existing portfolio. What? Keep going, Alan, it gets better. She was smiling. It was awful. Recommend Meridian be reclassified and the IP be secured and shelved. Halloran's turbine and drivetrain licensing revenue represents 11.4% of annual gross. Adoption of Meridian technology by any party including Halloran would render that portfolio obsolete inside a decade. Voss put his hand over his mouth. They didn't kill it because it didn't work, Vivian said. They killed it because it did. Vivian. They had it, Alan, in 2003. They had it and they put it in a box because they were making too much money on the old thing. She threw the page down. 23 years, she said. 23 years of what? Of aircraft burning 30% more fuel than they had to. Of every... She stopped. Her voice had gotten away from her. She hauled it back. That's not even the part. There's a part. There's a part. She picked up a thin folder. It was green. It had a stamp on it. April 2004, she said. Ethan and Grace Carter file for external publication. Standard. They're allowed. It's in their contract, I checked. I checked it twice. She opened the folder. Vane blocks it. They push. Vane blocks it again. So on May 11th, they go over his head. To who? Vivian looked at him. To my father, she said. Voss closed his eyes. There's a letter, Vivian said. It's handwritten. It's from Grace Carter. It's 2 pages. She's asking him, she's not threatening him, Alan. She's asking him to let them publish. She says, and I want you to hear this. Vivian's voice caught for the first time, and she stopped and breathed and started again. She says, Mr. Halloran, I understand the business case. I'm asking you to consider that we may be the only two people alive who know how to do this, and that neither of us is guaranteed tomorrow. Silence. She wrote that in May of 2004, Vivian said. Vivian, what happened to her? 6 weeks later, they were both terminated for cause. Vivian's hands were steady now, which was somehow worse. Cause was unauthorized disclosure. There was no disclosure. I've read every page in this row. There was no disclosure, Alan. They made it up. They fired them. They seized the notebooks. They invoked the IP assignment clause on everything either of them had touched in 6 years, and then Halloran filed the patents. We filed the patents. 9 of them. She held up the flimsy. Filed August 2004. Inventors listed as you're going to love this Gerald Vane and Halloran Advanced Concepts. Not Carter. Not Grace. And then we never built a single thing. We just sat on them for 20 years and let them run out. Voss stood up. He walked 4 steps and put his hand on a shelf. There's more, Vivian said. Don't. They sued us. Vivian, they sued us in 2005, and they lost because they had no money, and we had a floor of lawyers, and the settlement, Alan. The settlement barred Ethan Carter from working in propulsion for any employer in any capacity for 15 years. Voss turned around. That's not enforceable. It doesn't have to be enforceable, Vivian said. It just has to be expensive. She stood up. Paper slid off her lap. He was 33 years old, she said. He was the best in the world at the one thing he was made for, and we took the work. We took his wife's name off it. We took his name off it. We buried it in a basement so a licensing line item wouldn't dip. And then we made it so he couldn't even go do it somewhere else. For 15 years. And you know what the wildest thing is? He honored it. He waited. He waited out the whole 15 years. How do you? Because it expired in 2020, Alan. She laughed, and there was nothing in it. And the truck's been on this campus for 6. Voss stared at her. He's been finishing it, he said slowly. In a garage, on maintenance pay. 6 years, Vivian said. Parked 80 yards from the front door of the company that took it from him. Every single day. Why? And Vivian Halloran said very quietly. Because he's not done, Alan. Because he's still building it. And when he's done, he's going to walk it out the front gate, and there's not going to be a thing on God's earth we can do about it. And he wanted to be close enough that we'd have to watch. At 7:04 p.m., Vivian found the last box. It was smaller than the others. It had been taped shut, and the tape had gone yellow and brittle. Somebody had written on the lid in marker G. Carter, Personal Effects Hold. She looked at it for a while. Alan, she said, do you know when Grace Carter died? No. Vivian opened the box. There wasn't much. A coffee mug, a pair of reading glasses, a photo of a little girl maybe 11 gap-toothed on a bicycle, and a notebook. Vivian opened the notebook. It was engineering page after page of it, and she couldn't read most of it, and then about 2/3 of the way through the handwriting changed. It got looser. It got bigger. It skipped lines, and then it stopped being engineering. Ethan, if you're reading this, it's because I couldn't finish. I know you. You're going to sit in that garage, and you're going to try to do it out of spite, and spite doesn't hold a wave. Do it right or don't do it. Take care of Maddie. Take care of yourself, which you won't. Don't let them make you small. You were never small. Finish it when you can hear me again. G. Vivian read it 3 times. Then she put it down and put both hands over her face and made a sound she'd never made in front of another human being. Voss didn't say anything. He was a decent man. He just stood there. Alan? Yes? How much of this did my father know? Voss took a very long time to answer. All of it, he said. At 7:40 p.m., Vivian Halloran walked out of the archive and up 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator because she needed the 4 flights, and she came into her office and turned on her phone. 206 notifications. The first video was at 9 million views. Marcus Reed was standing by the window in the dark. Jesus, Marcus. Sorry. He didn't turn around. Where have you been? The basement. Yeah, he said. Figured. She dropped into her chair. 9 million. 11 since you came up the stairs. It's on the news. It's not a business story. Viv, it's on the actual news. It's the thing people are watching tonight. There's already a hashtag. It's not a nice one. What is it? You don't want... Marcus. He turned around. Not for sale, he said. That's what he said to you. That's the hashtag. There's 800,000 posts on it, and they're all people talking about their fathers. Vivian stared at nothing. Halberd pulled, Marcus said. What? Halberd Capital, 6:15 tonight, 2-line email. He shrugged. The DOE guy hasn't answered his phone. Whitlock says 3 of the 4 national outlets are running it in the morning, and the 4th one already ran it. Okay. Viv. Marcus, we stole it. He stopped. What? In 2003, Meridian. We had it and we buried it to protect a licensing line, and then we fired them and took their names off the patents, and my father signed it. She looked up at him, and her face was absolutely calm, and she was still crying, and she wasn't aware of it at all. His wife wrote my father a letter asking for permission to give the world a 30% efficiency gain, and he said no. And then she died. Marcus, she died, and she never got to put her name on it. And I stood in a parking lot today, and I called it garbage. Marcus Reed sat down slowly on the arm of the couch. How bad is the paper? He said. What? How bad is the paper, Vivian, legally? What did I just... He stopped himself. He started over, and to his credit, his voice was gentle. I'm asking because I have to ask, not because that's the important part. Paul says it's not good. How not good? Fraud on the patent office, wrongful termination, trade secret misappropriation, 15 years of a non-compete they never had the right to enforce. She almost smiled. Paul used the phrase existential, and then he asked if he could go home. Marcus was quiet a while. So what do you want to do? And right here at 7:52 p.m. on the worst day of her life, in a dark office with 11 million people watching a video of her throwing a man's wrench across a parking lot. Vivian Halloran had a choice. She could feel it. That was the awful thing. She could feel both doors standing open in the room with her. Behind one of them was a phone call to her father's old assistant. A press strategy. A legal posture. A quiet settlement with a man who had a daughter and a mortgage and no money, structured over 9 years, non-disclosure attached. Nobody had ever gone broke doing that. It had worked in 2005. It would work now. It would work because it always works. Behind the other one was nothing she could see at all. I want to talk to him, she said. Viv, I want to go to his house, and I want to knock on his door, and I want to say it to his face. Vivian, you cannot do that. Marcus stood up. You are the CEO of a company that is about to be sued into the ground by that man. Paul will have a stroke. Any communication. I'm not going as the CEO. There is no not as the CEO. That's not a thing. That's a thing people say in movies. He was almost shouting. Viv, listen to me. I have known you since you were 19. I watched your father do this. I watched him do this exact thing, and I want you to hear me. He never once believed he was the bad guy either. Not for 1 second. He always had a reason, and every reason was 400 jobs. Vivian looked at him. That's what I'm afraid of, she said. At 8:20 p.m., she was in her car. At 8:52 p.m., she was parked on a residential street in a part of town she'd never had a reason to drive through, in front of a small house with a chain-link fence and a porch light on, and a detached garage in back with light coming out from under the door. The rusted F250 was in the driveway. Vivian Halloran sat in her car for 11 minutes and could not make her hand open the door. At 9:03, the garage door went up. Ethan Carter was standing there in the light with a rag in his hand, looking straight at her car. He'd known she was there the whole time. He didn't wave her in. He didn't yell. He just stood there and looked, and then he turned around and went back into the garage and left the door open behind him. Vivian got out of the car. Her legs were not entirely working. She came up the driveway past the truck, and she could not stop herself. She put her hand on the fender as she went by on the bracket he'd welded at 2 in the morning 11 years ago, and it was cold and rough under her palm. She stopped in the doorway of the garage, and she saw it. Not the truck, the other one. Up on a stand under a work light, half assembled, machined out of something that caught the light, like water. An annular ring the size of a bass drum, with 100 injector ports around its face. And it was not a prototype. It was not a science project. It was finished work. It was the kind of thing that a man builds when he has had 20 years and nothing else left. There was a second one behind it, and a third. There was a rack of them. Vivian's hand went to her mouth. "How long?" she said. Ethan didn't turn around. 6 years on the truck, he said. 22 on the rest. "Mr. Carter, you rid the boxes." It wasn't a question. Vivian's throat closed. "Yes." "Row 9." "Yes." Ethan set the rag down. "Took you 4 hours, he said. "Took me 2 years and a lawyer I couldn't afford, and I never got past the front desk." He finally turned around. "Funny how that works." "I'm sorry." "Don't. Mr. Carter, Don't." His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the thing about him. "You've been sorry for 6 hours. My wife's been dead for 6 years. Don't stand in her garage and be sorry at me." Vivian stood there and took it. "Then tell me what to do," she said. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face, not softness. Something more dangerous than softness. Something like interest. "You really don't know, do you?" he said. "No. Your father knew, every minute. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway, and I could hate him clean." Ethan wiped his hands. "You didn't know, which means you get to pick." "Pick what?" "Which one of you you're gonna be." And behind them, out on the street, headlights came around the corner and stopped, and a car door opened, and a voice Vivian had known her entire life said from the end of the driveway, "Vivian, step away from him, right now." She turned around. Her father was standing at the gate. At 9:11 p.m., Richard Halloran opened the gate of a stranger's house like he owned it because in his experience he usually did. "Vivian, come here." She didn't move. "Vivian Ann." "Dad, what are you doing here?" "What am I?" He stopped at the bottom of the driveway. He was 71 years old, and he had the same grin she'd seen in a photograph 4 hours ago, except it wasn't a grin anymore. It had hardened into something a man wears. "You didn't call me back." "So you tracked my car." "You didn't call me back," he said again. Like that answered it, and to him it did. And then he looked past her into the light of the garage, and he saw Ethan Carter standing there with a rag in his hand. Vivian watched her father's face. She had never in her whole life seen him afraid. Not when her mother was sick. Not in '08 when the whole thing nearly went under. Not once. His face went the color of paper. "Ethan," he said. Ethan didn't answer. "Ethan, Richard Halloran took one step and stopped like there was a line on the concrete only he could see. "You look good." And Ethan Carter laughed. It was the first time Vivian had heard it, and it came out of him low and dry and completely without joy, and it was somehow the most frightening sound of the entire day. "I look good," Ethan said. "That's not 22 years, Richard. That's the opener. You look good. I don't want trouble." "No," Ethan agreed. "You never did. That was always the whole problem." At 9:14, Richard Halloran turned to his daughter and lowered his voice to the register he'd used her entire childhood, the one that meant the conversation was already over. "Get in your car. I'll follow you home. We'll fix this tomorrow with people in the room." "Dad? Vivian, do you have any idea what you've done tonight? Do you have the first idea you went to his house? You went to his house alone after you were on video, and every word out of your mouth in the last 10 minutes is discoverable." "Discoverable," Vivian said. "Yes, discoverable. That's a real word. That's a real thing." "Dad, I read the boxes. Silence. The porch light buzzed. What boxes? Richard said. Row 9? Her father's jaw moved. Charlotte let you down there. Charlotte's been waiting 22 years for somebody to walk down those stairs, Vivian said. She had them pulled before I got to the bottom step. She knew Dad. The 71-year-old part-timer in the basement knew, and the CEO didn't. Vivian. I read the Vane memo. Vivian. A fundamental threat to the existing portfolio. Her voice cracked open. 11.4% Dad. That's the number, right? That's what it was worth to you. 11.4% of gross. Richard Halloran's hands came up. You don't understand the context. Oh, don't do that. 1998 to 2004. Do you know what that company looked like? Do you know how thin we were? I had 2,200 people and a debt load that would have... He caught himself. He hauled it back. He was very good at that. You're standing in a driveway in a $400 coat judging decisions that bought that coat. He was 33. Everybody was 33. I was 49, and I had 11 banks. You took his wife's name off her own work. That was Vane. And Vivian Halloran said very quietly, You signed it. Richard Halloran stopped talking. At 9:18, Ethan Carter set his rag down on the workbench and walked out of the garage into the driveway, and both of them turned to look at him. He stopped 6 feet from Richard. You want to know the funny part? Ethan said. Ethan, you want to know the funny part, Richard? I've had 22 years to work out the funny part. He put his hands in his pockets. I wasn't going to publish. Richard blinked. What? That was Grace. That was all Grace. Ethan's voice stayed flat and even. I wanted the money. You understand, I was 33. I had a kid on the way. I wanted the money and the chair and the paper in Nature, and I wanted you to say my name at the shareholder meeting. I was as vain as you were, Richard. I just had less to be vain about. Then what? She's the one who said it belongs to everybody. She's the one who wrote you that letter. Ethan's chin came up half an inch. I told her not to send it. Told her you'd fire us. Nobody moved. You were right, Richard said. It came out of him before he could stop it, and it was the worst thing he ever said. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said. I was. Vivian felt something in her chest actually tear. So here's the funny part, Ethan said. I was right, and she sent it anyway, and it cost her the last 2 years of her life, and she never once, not one time, Richard. Not when the lawyers came, not when we sold the house, not when the 15-year thing came down, not lying in a hospital bed in March with a chart that said 4 to 6 weeks. She never once said she was sorry she sent it. His hands came out of his pockets, and I've spent 22 years trying to be the kind of man who could have written that letter. At 9:22 p.m., Richard Halloran said the thing he'd driven 40 minutes to say. Ethan, what do you want? Excuse me, that's not an insult. That's a serious question from a serious man. Richard's voice steadied. He was back on ground he knew. I've seen the video. Everybody's seen the video. You have leverage tonight that you will never have again in your life. And if you're smart, you'll spend it in the next 72 hours. Because in 90 days, the internet will be angry about somebody else, and you'll be a man with a garage and a lawyer's bill. Dad, stop. I'm being honest with him, Vivian, which is more than anybody's been all day. He turned back to Ethan. So name it. 8 figures. 9 maybe if you don't get greedy and if you sign tonight. Your name on the patents. Grace's name on the patents. A lab, a title, a chair, whatever you want to call it. I'll put her name on the building. I'll do it Monday. Vivian's stomach dropped. Because it was working. She could see it working. Not on Ethan, on her. It sounded reasonable. It sounded generous. It sounded like a good outcome, and she had to physically stop herself from saying, That's fair, Ethan. That's actually fair. And that was when she understood all the way down to the floor of herself, exactly how her father had done it in 2004. He hadn't twirled a mustache. He'd made an offer that sounded fair to everybody in the room. Ethan stood there. Her name on the building, he said. Her name on the building. And what happens to the engine? It comes home. It comes back to Halloran. We productionize it, we license it, On what timeline? Richard hesitated. It was half a second. It might as well have been a gunshot. Say the number, Richard. That's not how. Say the number. There are considerations. There it is. Ethan nodded slowly. There it is. 22 years, and you're still going to shelve it. You'd put her name on a building and put her work in a box. You'd give me 9 figures to make sure it stays exactly where it's been since 2004. That is not. Then tell me you'll ship in 24 months. Richard Halloran opened his mouth, and nothing came out. At 9:26, the porch light buzzed, and Vivian Halloran heard her own voice say, "Dad." He didn't look at her. Dad, tell him 24 months. Vivian, there are contracts. Tell him. There are contracts, Vivian. There are turbine service agreements out to 2038. There are. You want the number? Fine. $2.1 billion of contracted revenue that goes to zero the day that thing ships. And I'm not going to stand in a driveway and pretend otherwise for a woman who's been dead 6 years. The words got out. He heard them get out. Vivian watched her father's face as he heard himself. And there was one instant, one where he was just an old man in a driveway who wished he could take it back. Then it closed. Because that's what she'd never understood about him until right then. Her father wasn't evil. Her father just never took anything back. Ethan Carter said, "Get off my property." Ethan, "Get off my property, Richard, or I'll call the police, and the video of that is going to be worse than the one this afternoon." Richard Halloran stood there a moment. Then he turned to his daughter and said the last thing he said that night. "You've got a board meeting at 8 a.m., and if you're not in that chair, somebody else will be." He walked to the gate. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "I built that company out of nothing, Vivian. Out of nothing. And every single one of you gets to be disgusted with me from inside a building I paid for." He left. At 9:31 p.m., Vivian Halloran was standing alone in a driveway with a man whose life her family had eaten. "Mr. Carter? You should go." "Mr. Carter, I want to help." And Ethan turned around and looked at her, and for the first time all day, something in him actually cracked. "You want to help," he said. "Yes. Lady, do you know how many people have wanted to help?" He took a step toward her. "In 2006, a man from a fund in Boston sat in my kitchen for 4 hours and wanted to help, and when I showed him the math, he took it to his own guys and tried to build it without me and blew up a test cell in Lowell, and 2 people went to the hospital. In 2011, a defense contractor wanted to help, and what they wanted was to classify it so hard it'd never see daylight, and I'd need an escort to look at my own wife's notebook. In 2016, his voice finally went somewhere. In 2016, I had a foundation want to help. Nice people, real nice. And they wanted to know if maybe we could soften the claims a little, because 30% sounded implausible and it'd be easier to raise on 8. He stopped. He breathed. "Everybody wants to help," he said. "Nobody wants to ship it." "I want to ship it." "You want to ship it?" "Yes." "With what?" Ethan spread his hands. "You've got a board meeting at 8 a.m. and your dad just told you what happens if you're not in the chair. You want to ship a thing that zeros $2.1 billion of your own contracted revenue. Ma'am Vivian, I'm not being cruel. I'm being technical. You do not have the votes." Vivian stood there, because he was right, and she knew he was right, and she had known it since the word discoverable. "Then what do you need from me?" she said. And Ethan Carter said nothing. "Mr. Carter, nothing. That's the answer. That's been the answer since 2004. I just didn't have the hardware." He gestured back at the garage at the rack of them at the light. "I'm not asking you for a lab. I've got a lab. I'm not asking you for money. I don't need your money. I need 11 weeks and a dyno cell in Youngstown that I've already got a handshake on. I'm not asking you for her name on a building. I'm going to put her name on the front page of every paper on earth, and there is not one thing your family can do about it because the patents you stole expired. Richard let them lapse in 2024 to save maintenance fees, and the second they lapsed, the art went public, and every claim you had on me went with it." Vivian's mouth opened. "You waited for the patents to expire." "I waited 15 years for the non-compete," Ethan said. "Then I waited 4 more for the patents. 19 years, ma'am. I parked in your lot every day of the last 6 because I wanted to be looking at that building on the morning it ran. That's why you took a maintenance job." "That's why I took a maintenance job." At 9:38 p.m., Vivian Halloran said, "Then why'd you start it today?" And Ethan Carter stopped. She saw it hit him. "What?" "You waited 19 years." Her voice was shaking. "You had 11 weeks left. You were 11 weeks from doing it clean on your terms with nobody's hands on it. And then a woman insulted your truck in a parking lot, and you threw all of it away in front of 40 investors and 3 news crews." He didn't answer. "Why?" And Ethan Carter, who had not raised his voice one single time all day, said, "Because you laughed." Vivian flinched. "You want the truth?" "Here's the truth." His hands were shaking now. "I could take it. I took it for 6 years. I took it from your engineers. I took it from the kid at the gate. I took janitor from my daughter's friend's father. I can take anything, ma'am. That's my one skill in this world. And I have gotten so good at it that my 17-year-old thinks it's who I am." "Mr. Carter, and then you called her garbage." His eyes were wet and his voice had gone raw, and none of it stopped him. "And 200 people laughed. 200 people I fixed the heat for. And I thought..." He had to stop. He had to actually stop and get it. "I thought she's been dead 6 years, and they're still laughing at her." Silence. "So I started it," Ethan said. "Yeah, I blew 19 years of patience because I couldn't stand there and let 'em laugh at her one more second." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist once businesslike. "So no, you don't get to help. Go to your board meeting." At 9:44 p.m., Vivian Halloran walked down the driveway. She got halfway to the gate. Then a voice from the porch said, "You're the lady from the video." Vivian turned around. Maddie Carter was standing in the doorway in a sweatshirt with her arms crossed, 17 years old, and she had her mother's face out of a photograph in a box in a basement, and Vivian Halloran felt her knees go. "Maddie, go inside," Ethan said. "No." "Madison, no." The girl came out onto the step. "You know how many times he's been late for stuff? Because your generator's 20 years old and nobody'll buy a new one." She was looking straight at Vivian. "He missed my 9th grade thing. He missed the whole thing. He was in your building at 11 o'clock at night because you had a cold snap." "Maddie, and you called his truck garbage." Vivian said, "I did." Maddie stopped. She'd been braced for an argument. She hadn't been braced for that. "What?" "I did," Vivian said again. "It's on video. I said it and I laughed and I took a wrench out of his hand and I threw it, and there's no version of it where I'm anything but exactly what it looks like." Maddie's arms came uncrossed. "Okay," she said slowly. "Then what are you doing at my house?" And Vivian Halloran, who had 206 unread notifications and a board meeting in 10 hours, and a father who tracked her car, said the only true thing she had, "I don't know." At 9:51, Maddie Carter said, "Dad, tell her about the notebook." Ethan went rigid. "Maddie, tell her." "Madison." She read it, "Dad." The girl's voice went up, and it went thin, and suddenly she was not 17. She was 11. She was gap-toothed on a bicycle. "You think I don't know what's in that box? You think I didn't go looking?" "I was 11. Dad, I read Mom's letter to you when I was 11, and I've never told you, and I've been carrying it for 6 years." Ethan Carter took that like a man taking a punch. "You read it." "Do it right or don't do it," Maddie said. "Don't let them make you small." Nobody said anything. "You've been small for 6 years," his daughter said. "You've been so small, Dad. And today you weren't. And now she's standing in our driveway, and you're telling her to go home, and I swear to God, if you make it small again, I will never forgive you. At 9:56 p.m., Ethan Carter turned around and walked into his garage and did not come out for 4 minutes. Vivian stood in the driveway with a 17-year-old. "He'll come back," Maddie said. "Should I... don't?" The girl shrugged, and it was such a kid shrug, and it broke something in Vivian's chest. "He does that. He goes in there and touches it and comes back. Maddie, don't say sorry to me. I'm not the one you..." She stopped. She looked at the truck. "Do you know she taught him?" "What?" "Everybody's like, oh, the genius and his wife." Maddie's jaw set. She was Michigan and Caltech, and he was just Michigan. She was the one who could do the wave. He was the one who could build it. He says it in his sleep, like literally I've heard him. He says, "Gracie the wave." And her voice went, and she stopped, and she got it back, 17 years old, and Vivian Halloran would remember it for the rest of her life. So, when people say he's the genius, it's like they killed her twice. At 10 p.m., Ethan came back out. He had something in his hand. He walked up to Vivian and held it out, and it was a photograph, 41 people in front of a hangar, and she'd seen it 4 hours ago on the floor of a basement. "Charlotte mailed me a copy," he said. 2009, no note, just the picture. Vivian took it. "Second row," Ethan said. "I know." "Not me." He tapped the glossy with a fingernail. "Him." Vivian looked. Third from the left back row, a young man, maybe 26, thin glasses, half in shadow. "Who is that?" "That's Gerald Vane's analyst," Ethan said. "Kid named Marcus." The world went out from under her. "Reed." "Marcus Reed," Ethan said. At 10:02 p.m., Vivian Halloran's hands started to shake so hard she dropped the photograph. "No." "Yeah. No, Marcus was. Marcus came in 09. He came from..." She was talking fast. She couldn't stop. "He was at Cleveland Trust. He came over in 09. He's been in every..." "He was on Meridian for 11 months, Ethan said. "He ran the numbers for Vane. That memo you read, the 11.4%. That's his math. His handwriting's on the back of page 3. That's not... Go look. Marcus was in the room today. Marcus was in the room all day. Marcus stood in my office at 7:40 and asked me how bad the paper was." She stopped. She heard herself say it. "He asked me how bad the paper was." "He knew," she said. Ethan didn't answer. He knew this afternoon. He knew when Voss said the name. He knew in the parking lot. Vivian's voice was rising and she couldn't stop it. "He said, 'Viv, get inside.' He got me inside. He got me inside before Voss could..." "He's been managing you since the second I turned that key," Ethan said. "Probably longer." "Since when?" "Ma'am, I don't know your life." "Since when, Mr. Carter?" And Ethan said, "He signed off on my hire." Silence. "What?" 2020. Facilities maintenance. 2. It's a $49,000 job nobody signs off on, that it's a rubber stamp from HR. Ethan picked the photograph up off the concrete and wiped it on his shirt. "Except there's a countersign on mine. CFO. Vivian couldn't breathe. "He knew you were in the building. He's known for 6 years. Then why..." Her hands went to her head. "Why would he let you..." "Ma'am, think about it." "I can't think about it. I can't." "Yes, you can." Ethan's voice was almost gentle. "Where's the safest place in the world for a man who might sue you?" And Vivian Halloran said in a whisper, "Where you can see him." "Every day," Ethan said. 80 yards from the front door. Cheap, quiet, not talking to lawyers, not talking to reporters, just a sad old maintenance guy with a broke-down truck who everybody feels a little bad for and nobody ever asks about. He put the photograph in his pocket. "He wasn't hiding it from you, ma'am," Ethan said. He was parking it. At 10:09 p.m., Vivian Halloran's phone rang in her pocket. She looked at it. Marcus Reed. She stared at the screen. It rang 4 times. She didn't move. It stopped. Then a text came through and Vivian read it standing in a stranger's driveway with a 17-year-old watching her, and it said, "Board's moving it to 6. Don't come. I'll handle it. Trust me on this one." Vivian read it twice. Then she said out loud to nobody, "He's taking the chair." Maddie said, "What?" "He's taking the chair." Vivian laughed, and it was a terrible sound. It was her father's laugh coming out of her mouth. 6 a.m. He moved the board to 6 a.m. and told me not to come. He's got the video. He's got my father. He's got 22 years of knowing exactly where the bodies are. He doesn't have to fire me. I fired myself in a parking lot at 2:15 this afternoon. All he has to do is stand up and be sad about it. She looked up at Ethan. "And then he settles with you," she said, quietly, "structured over 9 years, with an NDA." Ethan didn't say anything. And it's 2005 again. At 10:14 p.m., Ethan Carter said, "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What did you want to be?" Vivian blinked. "What?" "Before all this, when you were a kid." He leaned on the fender of the truck. "What did you want to be?" And Vivian Halloran said, "An engineer," and then heard it and put her hand over her mouth. "Huh," Ethan said. I was 15. "Uh-huh. I did 2 years at Rose Holman." "I did 2 years and my father said," she stopped. "Say it." "He said, anybody can turn a wrench, Vivian. Not anybody can own the shop." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds like Richard." At 10:17 p.m., a car turned onto the street. It slowed. It stopped at the curb behind Vivian's. The door opened and a small figure in a cardigan got out, 66 years old, holding a cardboard file box against his chest with both arms, like a man carrying a child out of a fire. And Dr. Alan Voss came up the driveway breathing hard and said, Vivian, don't go to that meeting." "Alan, how did you—" "Charlotte told me where he lives." "Charlotte's known where he lives since 2009. She's the one who mailed him the—" Voss stopped. He looked at Ethan Carter. He looked at the open garage. He looked at the rack of them under the work light. And Dr. Alan Voss, 41 years in propulsion, chief scientist of Halloran Dynamics, dropped the box on the driveway and put both hands over his face and started to cry. "Alan, there's 6 of them," he sobbed. "Alan, what's in the box?" And Voss took his hands down and his glasses were fogged and he said, "The minutes." "What minutes?" "May 11th, 2004, the meeting where they killed it." He pointed at the box on the ground. "It's not in row 9. It's not in any row. Charlotte's had it in her car for 22 years. Vivian, she took it out of the burn bin the night before the shred." "Alan, what's in it?" Voss looked at her. "Your father wasn't the one who said no," he said. The whole street went silent. "What?" "Richard voted yes." Voss's voice was wrecked. "It's right there. He voted yes, Vivian. He voted to let them publish. He lost 4-1, and then he signed the memo anyway because the board told him to, and he wanted to keep his chair." Vivian couldn't feel her hands. "Who were the 4? "Vane," Voss said. "2 outside directors, both dead now. And a 26-year-old analyst who wasn't a director, who didn't have a vote, who spent 40 minutes of that meeting explaining to a room of grown men exactly how much money they'd lose." And behind them, in the doorway of the garage, Ethan Carter said quietly, "Marcus." At 10:23 p.m., Ethan Carter said, "Bring it inside." Nobody moved. "Dr. Voss, the box. Bring it inside before it rains on it." Alan Voss picked the box up off the driveway with hands that weren't working right, and Maddie Carter held the screen door. And at 10:26 p.m., the chief scientist of Halloran Dynamics and the sitting CEO of Halloran Dynamics sat down at a kitchen table with a chipped Formica top, while a 17-year-old put the kettle on because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Ethan didn't sit. He stood by the counter with his arms crossed and watched Vivian Halloran open a cardboard box that had been in the trunk of a 71-year-old woman's Buick since before his daughter was born. "Alan," Vivian said, "where's the vote?" "Page 9. She found page 9. It was a photocopy of a photocopy. It was crooked. Somebody had Xeroxed it in a hurry in the dark. And there it was, in the flat dead language of corporate minutes. Motion to permit external publication of Meridian findings per contractual provision, 14B with 90-day defensive filing window. Moved R. Halloran. Seconded none. Vote 1 to 4. Motion fails. Seconded none. Vivian read out loud. Yeah. Nobody even seconded it. Nobody wanted to be on the paper, Voss said. Vivian put the page down. He moved it himself, she said. He moved his own motion and nobody seconded it, and he lost 4 to 1, and then he signed the vain memo 6 days later. Yes. Alan, why didn't he tell me? And Voss said, because I tried is worse. Vivian looked up. What? Think about it. Voss took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes with his thumb and finger, and he looked 100 years old. If he's a villain, he's a man. He made a call. He can defend it. He's been defending it in your driveway an hour ago. But if he tried and lost and then signed it anyway, he shrugged. Then he's just a guy who wanted to keep his chair. And Richard Halloran would rather you think he's a monster than think he's a coward. At 10:31, Ethan Carter said from the counter, "It doesn't change anything." Vivian turned. "Mr. Carter, it doesn't change anything." His voice was completely level, and that was how she knew. You want to sit at my wife's table and feel better about your dad, that's your business. But the vote failed. The memo got signed. The names came off. And in June of 2004, 2 people got walked out of a building by security with a box each, and I don't care what he moved on May 11th. Ethan, Voss started. Don't Ethan me, Alan. Ethan, I'm just saying that a man can be... He signed it, Alan. And there it was, the first time all day Ethan Carter's voice actually got loud, and it went off in that kitchen like a shot. He signed it. He signed it. And then he had lawyers call my house. He signed it. And 8 months later, when Gracie couldn't get a job at a community college because there was a settlement with her name on it, he signed that too. The kettle started to whistle. Maddie shut it off. Nobody said anything for a while. I'm sorry, Ethan said quieter. I'm sorry. No, Voss said. No, you're right. You're right. I've spent 22 years telling myself a story about that man, and I'd like to keep telling it, and that's my problem, not yours. At 10:38 p.m., Vivian Halloran's phone lit up on the table. Marcus Reed. All 3 of them looked at it. Don't, Voss said. Alan? Vivian. Don't, he's going to talk you out of. She picked it up. Marcus. Hey. His voice was warm. It was so warm. That was the thing that made her stomach turn over, that it was the exact same voice it had been for 17 years. You okay? I'm fine. You're not fine. Nobody's fine. Where are you? Vivian looked across the kitchen at Ethan Carter. Home, she said. Good. Good, stay there. Listen. A breath. 6 a.m. I know it's early. Don't come. Why? Because they're going to want blood. Viv. And if you're in the room, they'll take it out of you personally. And if you're not in the room, I can shape it. I've done this before. Trust me. You've done this before? Vivian said. There was a pause on the line. It was maybe a second and a half. Viv. When have you done this before, Marcus? Another pause. Shorter. 08, he said easily. The restructuring. You were 19. Right, Vivian said. 08. Get some sleep. I'll call you at 7:30 and tell you what happened. Marcus? Yeah. When did you start at Halloran? The silence on that phone was the longest 4 seconds of Vivian Halloran's life. 2009, Marcus Reed said. Why? And Vivian said no reason and hung up. She put the phone face down. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat on the table. He lied to me, she said. Yes, Voss said. He lied to me on the phone, just now, straight out. Not a shading, she was breathing wrong. 17 years, Alan. He came to my mother's funeral. He taught me how to read a P&L. He's the one who told me I could do this job. Ethan said quietly, he probably meant that part. Vivian looked up at him. That's the thing people never get, Ethan said. He's not a snake in a suit. He's a guy who was 26 years old and got asked to do the math, and he did the math, and he was right, and it worked, and everybody in that room told him he was brilliant. And then he did it again, and again. He shrugged. By the time you're 52, you're not a man who made a decision. You're a man made out of decisions. At 10:44, Maddie Carter said, "So go to the meeting." Everybody turned. What? He told you not to come. The girl was standing at the counter with her arms folded. That's the whole plan. The whole plan is you not being there. So go. Maddie, it's not that simple. Why not? Because I don't have the votes, honey. Vivian said it before she heard herself say honey to a stranger's kid, and something in her face came apart. Because there's 9 people on that board, and 4 of them my father put there, and 3 of them are terrified, and I threw a wrench in a parking lot on video that 11 million people have watched. I walk in that room, I lose 6-3, maybe 7-2. So lose, Maddie said. Silence. What? Lose in the room? Maddie's chin came up, and Vivian saw the photograph again, the small dark-haired woman making a face at the camera. My mom lost 4-1. She still made him move the motion. At 10:52 p.m., Vivian Halloran stood up from a kitchen table and said, Mr. Carter, one question. Go ahead. 11 weeks. You said 11 weeks to the dyno in Youngstown. That's right. What's the 11 weeks for? Ethan looked at her a long moment. Then he said, Come here, and walked out to the garage, and Vivian and Voss followed him, and Voss made a sound in his throat when the light came on that Vivian would think about for years. 6 units, Ethan said. 4 are for show. 2 are real. This one. He put his hand flat on the ring on the stand, and it was such a tender gesture, so absolutely without ceremony that Vivian had to look away. This one runs. That's what you heard today. And it runs for 11 seconds. Voss said, What? 11 seconds, Alan? Then the injector face starts eating itself. Ethan tapped the ring. The wave's stable. The wave's been stable since 2003. That's Grace's math, and Grace's math doesn't miss. It's the materials. I'm putting a shock front around a ring 4,000 times a second at 3,000 Kelvin, and I'm doing it on parts I machined in a garage with money from a $49,000 maintenance job. So the 11 weeks is coatings, Ethan said. There's a lab in Youngstown that does thermal barrier work for a turbine outfit. Guy owes me. He'll run 6 faces for me at cost, and if 2 of them come back inside spec, I've got a unit that'll go 4 hours, and 4 hours is ship. 4 hours is a thing you can put on a stage and let a stranger touch. Vivian said, And today? Ethan didn't answer. Mr. Carter, today, you ran at 11 seconds. Yeah. How many seconds did it have left? And Ethan Carter said 0. Voss said, Oh my God, it's done. Ethan pulled the work light closer and turned the ring a quarter turn, and even Vivian, who had done 2 years at Rose-Hulman 20 years ago and never touched a machine since, could see it, a bloom of discoloration across a third of the injector face, purple going gray, going to something that wasn't metal anymore. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's 22 years and $400,000 of my own money, and it's scrap. I can't run it again. Not for a second. Not for a tenth of a second. Then the backup. There's no backup, Alan. Ethan's hands came up. There's 5 decorations and a dead one. You think I've got a spare on maintenance pay with a kid going to college?" Vivian's mouth had gone dry. "So this afternoon." "This afternoon," Ethan said. "I burned my only working article in a parking lot out of pride because I couldn't stand 200 people laughing at my wife. 11 weeks early, with no codings and no data and no lawyer and no company." He set the light down. "So no, ma'am," he said. "It's not 11 weeks anymore. It's 11 weeks if Youngstown comes through, if the faces come back in spec, if nobody with 400 lawyers decides to make it complicated. And they will. They will. Because now they know. Because there's 11 million people who heard exactly what it sounds like, and every defense outfit, and every fund, and every government on this planet spent tonight watching that video on a loop and thinking the same thing your daddy thought in 2004. Which is what? That it's worth more dead," Ethan said. At 11:04 p.m., Alan Voss said, "I can do the codings." Ethan turned. "What?" "I can do the codings." Voss's voice was steady for the first time all night. "We've got a plasma spray cell in Building 4. It's mine. It's been mine for 19 years. I can do 6 faces in 9 days, Ethan, not 11 weeks, and I can do them better than a job shop in Youngstown because I've been doing thermal barrier on turbine hot sections since before that shop existed." Nobody breathed. "Alan," Vivian said slowly, "that's company equipment." "Yes." "On company property?" "Yes. For a man who is going to sue this company into the ocean." "Yes," Voss said, and he was almost shouting and his hands were fists. "Yes, Vivian, yes. I have spent 41 years of my life chasing a thing that was sitting in a basement in this building the entire time, and I have 12 years left if I'm lucky, and I am not going to spend them being a good employee." Ethan Carter looked at him. "Alan," he said, "they'll fire you. Let them. They'll take your pension. Let them try. You've got grandkids, Alan." And Alan Voss said, "I've got 4 grandkids, Ethan, and every single one of them is going to live on the planet. We hand them, and if I have to hand it to them on fire so I can keep a pension, then what in God's name was any of it for?" The garage was very quiet. Maddie Carter, standing in the doorway, said, "Dad, say yes." At 11:09 p.m., Ethan Carter said 9 days. 9 days. "You'd have to have the geometry." "Then give me the geometry." "Alan, if I give you the geometry and this goes sideways and it ends up in their hands." And Alan Voss said, "Then I'll have failed you, and I'll deserve every ugly thing you say about me for the rest of your life. And I'm asking you to take the chance anyway because she did." Ethan stopped. "What did you say?" "I read the letter, Ethan." Voss's chin trembled. "Vivian read it to me on the floor of a basement 6 hours ago. Your wife wrote to a man she had every reason not to trust and asked him to do the right thing, and he didn't, and she was still right to ask." Ethan Carter stood there in his own garage for 11 seconds. Then he walked to a cabinet and opened it and took out a black 3-ring binder that had been touched so many times the cover had gone soft, and he held it out, and his hand was shaking. "This is her handwriting," he said. "I know. Alan, this is all of her. This is the only—" His voice quit. Voss took it in both hands. "I'll bring it back," he said. At 11:14 p.m., Vivian Halloran walked out to her car and got in and sat with her hands on the wheel. At 11:16, she called her father. He picked up on the first ring. "Vivian." "You moved the motion," she said. Silence. "Dad, May 11th, 2004. You moved it yourself and nobody seconded it and you lost 4-1. Where did you get that?" "Does it matter? Where did you get that, Vivian?" "The burn bin," she said. "Charlotte took it out of the burn bin the night before the shred, and it's been in her car for 22 years, Dad. A part-time archivist did more for that man than you did." Her father breathed on the line. "You want me to say I'm the good guy?" he said. "No." "Then what?" "I want to know why you signed it." "Because I lost Vivian." And there was something in his voice she'd never heard. It took her a second to place it, and when she did, it made her sick because it was exhaustion. "Because I lost 4-1, and I had 11 banks, and 2,200 people, and a board that would have had me out in a week, and I told myself I'd fix it later. From the chair. That's what you tell yourself. You tell yourself you have to keep the chair so you can fix it later. And did you? Did I what? Fix it later. Richard Halloran didn't answer. 22 years, Dad. Vivian. 22 years of later. Don't you dare. Marcus was in the room, Vivian said. The line went completely silent. Dad, Marcus was in the room. He did the math. He's the 4. Nothing. Say something. Vivian, go home. He's been managing me since 2:15 this afternoon, and he moved the board to 6 a.m., and he told me not to come, and he countersigned Ethan Carter's hire in 2020. Dad, he's known where that man was for 6 years. Vivian, go home. And Vivian Halloran said, You knew that too. Silence. Oh my God, she said. You knew he was in the building. Vivian, you knew Ethan Carter was parking in your lot every day for 6 years and you never said a word to me. It was handled. By who, Dad? By Marcus. Her father hung up. Vivian sat in a stranger's driveway at 11:23 p.m. and looked at a dark phone screen and understood finally all the way down that she had been the last person in the entire company to know anything. At 11:31 p.m., she typed a message. She deleted it. She typed it again. At 11:44 p.m., Vivian Halloran sent 9 words to 8 people and they were, I'll be at the 6 a.m., bring the Meridian file. At 11:46, her phone rang. Marcus Reed. She let it ring. At 11:47, it rang again. She let it ring. At 11:49, a text came in, and it said only Viv. Don't. And Vivian Halloran typed back 1 word, and it was no. At 5:52 a.m., in a lobby that smelled like carpet cleaner, Ruth Delgado looked up from the front desk and said, Well, look who's up. Morning, Ruth. You look like hell, hon. Thanks. You gonna be okay in there? Vivian stopped. No, she said, and Ruth Delgado, 19 years at that desk, said, Good, and buzzed her through. At 5:58 a.m., Vivian Halloran opened the door of the 4th floor conference room, and 8 people stopped talking at once. Marcus Reed was in her chair, not sitting at the head of the table. He was standing, he was pouring coffee. He was doing the thing he'd done at 10,000 meetings, but the chair at the head of the table had his jacket over the back of it, and everybody in that room knew exactly what that meant. Viv. His face did something complicated. You came. I came. Okay. He set the pot down. Okay, everybody let's sit. At 6:04 a.m., Douglas Farron, 68 years old on the board since 1996, one of the 4 her father had put there, said, Vivian, I'll be blunt. We've all seen it. Yes. 14 million views as of this morning. The Journal ran it above the fold. There's a hashtag. I know about the hashtag. There's a Michigan senator who put out a statement, Vivian. Farron's hands opened. About a pickup truck. I know. So. He sat back. I'd like to hear you say what you think happened. And Vivian Halloran put a cardboard box on the table. Marcus Reed looked at the box. Vivian watched him look at it. She watched his face for exactly 1 second, and she saw it a flicker gone as fast as it came, and she thought, There you are. What's that? Farron said. May 11th, 2004, Vivian said. Minutes. The room changed. Vivian, Marcus started. Project Meridian. Halloran Advanced Concepts. 41 people, a building, and a rotary detonation engine that worked in 2003. She opened the box. Sustained detonation, 22 seconds, 91%. Theoretical, March 14th, 2003. Test Article 9. Alan Voss says that's the most important 22 seconds in the history of propulsion, and I'm inclined to take his word for it. Nobody moved. On May 11th, 2004, Vivian said, The two people who built it asked permission to publish. That was their right under Provision 14B of a contract this company wrote. The motion was moved by Richard Halloran. It was not seconded. It failed 4-1. She put page 9 on the table. 6 days later, Gerald Vane wrote a memo recommending the technology be shelved because it would obsolete 11.4% of gross. My father signed it. 6 weeks after that, Ethan and Grace Carter were terminated for a disclosure that never happened. Their notebooks were seized, and this company filed 9 patents listing Gerald Vane as inventor. Douglas Farron said very slowly, "Vivian, I want you to stop talking." "No. Vivian, as a director of this corporation, I am instructing you." Then in 2005 they sued us and lost because they were broke, and the settlement barred Ethan Carter from working in his own field for 15 years, and he honored it, and then he waited 4 more for the patents to lapse, and then he took a $49,000 maintenance job in this building. Vivian's voice was shaking now, and she let it. "And yesterday I called his dead wife's life's work garbage in a parking lot, and 200 of you laughed." The room was absolutely silent. "That's what happened," Vivian said. At 6:11 a.m., Marcus Reed said, "Vivian, sit down, please. I'm asking you as a friend." "I am sitting, Marcus. You're not." He stopped. He smiled. It was so kind. "Okay. Doug, can I?" "Vivian, can I say something, and then you can throw me out of the room? That's fine." Farron said, "Go ahead." And Marcus Reed turned to the board and said in a voice like a warm hand on your back, "She's right, about all of it." Vivian's head came around. "Every word," Marcus said. "It happened. It's ugly. And I want to be the first person in this room to say out loud that if we had to do it over, we wouldn't do it again." Farron said, "We." And Marcus Reed said, "I was there." At 6:12 a.m. 8 people made the same small sound at the same time. I was 26 years old, and I was an analyst on Meridian, and I did the modeling, and I presented it to that board, and I was in the room when the vote failed. He said it plainly. He said it like a man setting down a bag he'd carried a long way. And I've thought about it every day for 22 years. Vivian couldn't speak, because it was brilliant. It was the single most brilliant thing she had ever watched a human being do. He'd taken her only weapon out of her hands and set it on the table and said, "Yes, that's mine." And now he wasn't a man hiding a secret. He was a man who'd confessed, and there is nothing in an American boardroom more armored than a man who has just confessed. Marcus Farron said, "Why in God's name didn't you?" "Because I signed an agreement, Doug. Same as Alan. Same as 41 people. He spread his hands. "And because I'll be honest with you, because I was scared. For 22 years. And yesterday at 2:15 I heard that engine, and I thought, thank God. Thank God it's over." "Then why," Vivian said, "did you tell me not to come?" Marcus turned to her, and for 1 second the warmth went off his face like a light going out. "Because you're not ready for this," he said. "Excuse me, Viv. I love you like family." He said it gently. He said it to the room. "And you are 34, and you've been in that chair 14 months, and yesterday you took a wrench out of a working man's hand on camera because his truck was in your shot." The room shifted. Vivian felt it shift. "That's not a scandal," Marcus said. "That's a tell. That's who somebody is when they think nobody's grading them, and I've watched your father be exactly that man for 25 years, and I have sat in this room and watched you become him month by month, and I said nothing because I was a coward about that too. Marcus, so here's what I'd like to propose to the board." He hadn't raised his voice once. "We do it right. All of it. Full internal review outside counsel. We go to the Carters. We make it whole. We put Grace Carter's name on every one of those patents where it should have been in 2004, and we do it loud." Farron said, "And leadership." And Marcus Reed said, "Vivian steps back, temporarily, 90 days. Not fired, not disgraced, and I'll say that on camera myself. She steps back because she's the face of the video, and she knows that, and because the only way anybody believes we've changed is if the person who said the words isn't the one running the apology. Silence. And who runs it in the interim? Farron asked. Marcus Reed looked at his hands. I'll do it, he said. Reluctantly, 90 days. And I'll tell you right now, I don't want it. At 6:19 a.m., Vivian Halloran understood that she had already lost, and that it had taken him 7 minutes, and that she had handed him the box. Ship it, she said. Marcus looked up. What? Ship it? Her voice was very quiet. You said make it whole. Fine. Then commit to a shipping product, right now, in front of 9 people. 24 months. Vivian, we can't put a date on 36. That's not a serious. 48 months, Marcus. You're asking me to promise aboard a schedule for a technology I have never seen. You've seen it. You saw it yesterday. You heard it. You were standing 11 feet from me. I heard a truck, Marcus said, and it was the first crack. It was the very first crack all morning, and Vivian lunged at it. You heard a truck. Vivian. Doug asked him what he said in the parking lot. Ask him. He said, Viv, get inside. 14 seconds after Alan Voss said the name Carter out loud, before anyone in that lot knew what they'd heard, Marcus Reed's first instinct was to get me inside a building. Marcus said, that's called protecting you. That's called containment. Vivian. You countersigned his hire. The room stopped. Marcus Reed did not blink. His what? Ethan Carter. Facilities Maintenance 2. 2020. $49,000 a year rubber stamp from HR. Except there's a CFO countersign on it, and it's yours. That's an HR compliance flag, Marcus said smoothly. Any hire with prior litigation history against the company gets a finance countersign. It's a control. It's been in the manual since 2012. Doug Renee can pull it in 5 minutes. And it was true. That was the horror of it. Vivian could hear that it was true. You knew he was in the building, she said. I knew a name went through a system, Vivian. For 6 years. I sign 900 things a month. You knew he was 80 yards from your desk for 6 years, and you never said one word to me. And Marcus Reed said, and what exactly would you have done, Viv? The room went dead. What would you have done? He said again, and his voice was so soft, and it was the cruelest thing anybody said in that building in 22 years. If I'd walked into your office in March and said, hey, the guy who fixes the HVAC invented the future and your father buried it, what would you have done? Vivian Halloran opened her mouth, and nothing came out, because she knew. You'd have called Paul Ito, Marcus said. You'd have asked how bad the paper was. At 6:24 a.m., Douglas Farron called the question. At 6:26 a.m., the board of Halloran Dynamics voted 7-2 to place Vivian Halloran on a 90-day administrative leave, effective immediately, and to appoint Marcus Reed interim chief executive. At 6:27, Vivian stood up. Viv, Marcus said. Don't leave like this, please. Marcus. Yeah. You're never going to ship it, she said. And Marcus Reed said, I'm going to do what's best for 400 people. And he meant it. And that was the whole thing. That was the entire 22 years in one sentence. And Vivian Halloran walked out of that room, understanding it perfectly for the first time in her life. At 6:41 a.m. in the parking lot, her badge didn't open the gate. At 6:44 a.m., Ruth Delgado came out into the cold in her cardigan and lifted the arm by hand and said, Go on, hon. At 7:02 a.m., Marcus Reed made his second call of the morning. It went to Building 4. At 7:09 a.m., 2 security officers and a woman from HR walked into a plasma spray cell where a 66-year-old man in a cardigan was standing over a fixture with a black 3-ring binder open on a bench beside him, and the woman from HR said, Dr. Voss, I need you to step away from the machine. And Alan Voss said no. At 7:11 a.m., they took the binder. At 7:14 a.m., Marcus Reed's phone buzzed with a text from a number he'd had for 22 years and never once used, and it said, "Marcus. It's Ethan. Give it back and I'll forget it." At 7:16 a.m., Marcus Reed typed, "That binder is Halloran property under the 2005 settlement, Ethan. So is everything in it. Come in and let's talk. No lawyers, just us." And at 7:18 a.m., in a garage 40 minutes away, Ethan Carter read that text and set the phone down on the workbench and stood there for a long, long moment. Then he picked it up and made a call he had been not making for 19 years. "Yeah," he said. "This is Ethan Carter. I need to speak to whoever books the keynote." At 7:19 a.m., the woman on the other end of the line said, "I'm sorry, sir, this is the North American Energy Summit, where the keynote's been booked since October. Who is it?" "Sir, I can't." "Ma'am, humor me." She sighed. "It's the CEO of Halloran Dynamics." And Ethan Carter laughed out loud in his own garage. "Of course it is," he said. "When?" "Sir." "When, ma'am?" "It's public. It's on your website. I'm looking at it." A pause, typing. 9 days, she said. The 26th. Cleveland. Ethan closed his eyes. 9 days. The exact number Alan Voss had put on the table at 11:04 the night before, standing in a garage with tears still on his face, promising 6 coded injector faces from a plasma cell he no longer had access to, using a binder that was now sitting in a locked drawer on the 4th floor of a building Ethan Carter was no longer allowed to enter. "Ma'am," he said. "Who's your program chair?" "Sir, I really—" "Ma'am." His voice didn't rise. It never did. "My name is Ethan Carter. Yesterday afternoon, a woman called my truck garbage in a parking lot. 14 million people have watched it." The line went completely silent. Then, in a totally different voice, the woman said, "Oh my God, you're him." "Yes, ma'am." "Hold. Hold. Hold. Do not hang up." At 7:31 a.m., a man named Peter Ostrander, program chair of the North American Energy Summit, took a call in his kitchen in his bathrobe and said the words, "Mr. Carter, I've got 40 minutes on that stage, and I will give you every one of them," before Ethan finished his second sentence. At 7:33, Ethan said, "I don't want 40, I want 12. 12 and 12 minutes and a loading dock." "A loading dock." "Mr. Ostrander." Ethan said, "I'm going to bring a truck." At 7:52 a.m., Vivian Halloran was sitting in her car in a grocery store parking lot because she had nowhere else to be for the first time since she was 19 years old. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" "It's Ethan Carter." She sat straight up so fast she hit her elbow on the door. "Mr. Carter." "They took the binder." "What?" 7-Eleven this morning. 2 security guys and a lady from HR. Alan wouldn't move, so they moved around him. A breath. "It's in a drawer on your floor." "It's not my floor anymore." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I heard. Ruth called Charlotte. Charlotte called Alan. Alan called me. You people have no idea how fast the basement moves." Vivian put her forehead on the steering wheel. "He countersigned your hire," she said. "It's a real control. It's in the manual." He had an answer for everything. He had an answer ready. And I walked in there with a cardboard box and handed it to him. And he said thank you and used it to... Ma'am. He confessed, Mr. Carter. He confessed to all of it in the first 90 seconds. And then he was the only honest man in the room, and I was the woman from the video. "Ma'am." She stopped. "Are you done?" Ethan said. "Wait. Are you done feeling it, or do you need another minute? I'm asking seriously. Take the minute if you need it. But when it's over, I've got a question, and it's the only one that matters." Vivian wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Ask it." "Do you still have your key card?" Silence. "They killed my badge at 6:40, she said. "That's not what I asked." "Mr. Carter." "Ma'am, do you still have the plastic?" Vivian looked at the card sitting in her cup holder, where she'd thrown it in a rage 40 minutes ago. "Yes," she said slowly. "Why?" And Ethan Carter said, "Because Alan says the badge system's on a domain controller that hasn't been patched since 2019. And Alan says the man who does the patching is a maintenance 2 who's been telling them to fix it for 6 years, and Alan says that man wrote the ticket down, and there's a ticket number, and it's got a date on it." Vivian's mouth opened. "Mr. Carter, are you asking me to help you break into my own building?" "No, ma'am," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to help me file a work order." At 9:14 a.m., Marcus Reed stood in front of 200 employees in an atrium and gave the best speech of his life. He didn't use notes. He said Grace Carter's name 4 times. He said that Halloran Dynamics had done a terrible thing in 2004, and that he had been in the room and had never spoken, and that he had carried it for 22 years. He said an outside firm would begin a full review Monday. He said the patents would be corrected. He said the words, "We will make this right," and a woman in the 3rd row started crying. He said nothing at all about a schedule. At 9:41 a.m., the clip went out. By noon, it had 6 million views. By 3 p.m., 2 national outlets had run the phrase "the CFO who confessed." At 3:12 p.m., Douglas Farron called him and said, "Marcus, that was extraordinary. That was the board's very pleased." "Thank you, Doug." "The 90 days," Farron said carefully. "We might want to think about whether 90's the right—" "Let's not get ahead of it," Marcus said, and meant it, and was already 3 moves past it. At 3:20 p.m., in a garage 40 minutes away, Alan Voss threw a wrench at a wall. He said her name. Voss was shaking. He stood up there and said Grace Carter 4 times, and he cried, "Ethan, I watched him and I believed him and I know—" "He wasn't lying," Ethan said. "What?" "He wasn't lying, Alan. That's the whole trick. He's not lying about any of it." Ethan didn't look up from the bench. "He's sorry. He's genuinely sorry. He'll be sorry at your funeral. Sorry's free." At 3:24 p.m., Maddie Carter said from the doorway, "So make it expensive." At 4 p.m., day 2, Vivian Halloran filed a work order. She did it from the parking lot of a Bob Evans on a laptop logged into a vendor portal that Ethan Carter had been given access to in 2021, because nobody at Halloran wanted to deal with the HVAC contractor using a login that had never been tied to a badge, because the maintenance shop had been running on duct tape and goodwill since before Vivian was born. The work order said, "Building 4 plasma spray, cell thermal event risk after hours access, required ref ticket 14-2211. It auto-approved in 9 seconds." Because nobody reads work orders. At 4:03, Vivian said out loud to nobody, "Oh my God, it worked," and laughed so hard she cried. At 8:40 p.m., day 2, a 66-year-old man in a cardigan walked into Building 4 with a printed work order and a clipboard and said good evening to a security guard named Terrence, who had known him for 19 years. And Terrence said, "Evening, Dr. Voss," and went back to his phone. At 8:44 p.m., Alan Voss opened the drawer on the 4th floor with a key he'd had since 2007. The binder was there. At 8:46 p.m., he photographed every one of the 411 pages with his phone, put the binder back exactly as he'd found it, closed the drawer, and went downstairs and made 6 injector faces. At 2:15 a.m., he walked out with them in a gym bag. Terrence said, "Night, Dr. Voss." Voss said, "Night, Terrence," and got in his car and sat there and shook for 11 minutes before he could drive. At 6:30 a.m., day 3, Ethan Carter put a coated face under a light and looked at it for a long time. "Alan? Well, how'd you get the taper?" "I didn't. Your wife did. Page 261, there's a note in the margin. It says, 'If you're doing this in a spray cell, tell them to walk the taper out to point 4. Voss's voice went. "Ethan, she wrote that in 2003. She wrote a note to a technician who wouldn't exist for 22 years. Ethan set the face down. He put both hands flat on the bench and stood there with his head down. "Dad," Maddie said, "I'm fine." "Dad." "I'm fine, honey." At 7:02 a.m., day 4, the first test ran for 9 minutes and 40 seconds, And then Ethan shut it down clean because he was out of fuel, not because anything broke. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Alan Voss sat down on the floor of a garage and did not get up for a while. At 7:20 a.m., day 5, Marcus Reed's assistant said, "There's a man here to see you." "Who?" "He says his name's Richard Halloran." At 7:22 a.m., Richard Halloran walked into an office he'd occupied for 25 years and looked at the man sitting in it. "Marcus." "Richard." Marcus stood. "Sit down, please." "You put my daughter out." "The board put your daughter out, 7-2. Marcus poured him coffee without asking because he knew how Richard took it. "You want the honest answer or the polite one?" "Honest." She was going to burn it down. Marcus handed him the cup. She read the boxes, Richard, all of them. She was going to walk into that room and confess on behalf of a corporation with 400 employees and 9 expired patents and $2.1 billion in contracted revenue, and she was going to do it because she felt bad. And feeling bad is not a strategy. Richard Halloran held the cup and didn't drink. "You did the math," he said. "Yes." "In 2004. In that room." "Yes." "Marcus, I moved that motion." "I know," Marcus said. "I was there. You moved it, and I killed it, and you signed the memo 6 days later anyway." He sat back down. "And Richard, I want you to hear me. I have never held that against you. Not for one day. Because you did exactly what I'd have done." Richard Halloran set the coffee down. "You know what your problem is, Marcus. Tell me." "You've never once been wrong," Richard said. 22 years. Every single call you made was right. The math was right. It always worked. And so you never got the one thing a man needs. "Which is a night," Richard said, "where you lie there at 3 in the morning and you know." He stood up. "I got mine in 2004, he said. "I've had it every night since. That's the only reason I'm still a person." At 7:31 a.m., Richard Halloran walked out and did not come back. At 11:04 a.m., day 6, Vivian Halloran knocked on the door of a small house with a chain-link fence. Maddie opened it. "He's in the garage. Should I?" "He said if you showed up to send you out back." The girl considered her. "You look terrible." "I've been sleeping in a Hampton Inn." "Why?" "Because my father's house has my father in it." Maddie almost smiled. At 11:09 a.m., Vivian stood in the garage doorway, and Ethan Carter said without turning around, "Grab that torque wrench." She stopped. "Excuse me." "Torque wrench. Red handle. Behind you." "Mr. Carter, I don't—" "Ma'am, I've got a man with a bad shoulder and a 17-year-old with a chemistry final and 6 faces to land in a fixture in 4 hours. Do you want to be useful, or do you want to apologize again?" Vivian Halloran stood there for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up the torque wrench. "What's the spec?" she said. And Ethan Carter turned around and looked at her for the first time in 6 days. 22 foot-pounds, he said. "Star pattern, 2 passes." "I know what a star pattern is." "Do you?" 2 years at Rose-Hulman, Vivian said, and got down on the concrete in a $400 coat. At 3:40 p.m., Alan Voss said, "She's not bad." "She's slow," Ethan said. "I can hear you," Vivian said. At 6:15 p.m., day 6, Vivian Halloran had grease on her wrist and a blister and had not looked at her phone in 4 hours and could not remember the last time she had been that happy. And it made her so ashamed she had to go stand in the driveway for a minute. Ethan came out. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Uh-huh." Vivian wiped her eyes. "I'm 34 years old and I just found out I like torquing bolts." "Yeah," Ethan said. "That's the disease." "My father said anybody can turn a wrench." "Your father," Ethan said, "couldn't turn a wrench." At 9:12 a.m., day 8, Marcus Reed's phone rang. "Marcus, Peter Ostrander." "Pete, everything set for Thursday. That's actually why I'm calling." A pause that lasted a half-second too long. Marcus, we've made a change to the program. Marcus Reed put down his pen. What kind of change? We've moved you to 11:15. Pete, I'm the keynote. You're still on the main stage. Peter. Marcus's voice stayed pleasant. That was the terrifying thing about him. It stayed pleasant. Who has 9:30? Silence. Pete. Marcus, I want you to hear it from me before you see it. Who has 9:30? And Peter Ostrander said, Ethan Carter. At 9:14 a.m., for the first time in 22 years, Marcus Reed made a mistake. Cancel it, he said. What? Cancel it, Pete. That man is in active litigation with this company. The technology he intends to demonstrate is Halloran intellectual property under a 2005 settlement agreement. And if you put him on that stage, I will have counsel contact your board by noon. There was a very long pause. Marcus, Peter Ostrander said quietly, you know I record these, right? For scheduling. At 9:31 a.m., the recording was with Ethan Carter's lawyer. At 10:02 a.m., it was with the Wall Street Journal. At 1:14 p.m., the story went up, and the headline was 11 words long, and the 11th word was again. At 1:40 p.m., Douglas Farron called an emergency session. At 2:55 p.m., Marcus Reed sat in a conference room and said, Doug, I was protecting the company's legal position. Marcus. The settlement is valid, the assignment clause. Marcus. Farron's voice was terrible. 8 days ago, you stood in the atrium and cried about that woman's name. I meant it. I know you meant it. Farron slammed his hand on the table, and 8 people jumped. That's worse, Marcus. That's so much worse. You meant every word, and then you picked up a phone and tried to have him pulled off a stage, and I sat here and voted 7-2 to hand you this company because I could not tell the difference. At 3:01 p.m., Marcus Reed said, Doug, if that engine ships this company is finished, that's not a threat. That's arithmetic. $2.1 billion in contracted service revenue. 400 jobs. You want to be the man who, and Douglas Farron, 68 years old on the board, since 1996 said, Marcus, we've been finished since 2003. We just kept getting paid. At 3:09 p.m., the board of Halloran Dynamics voted 9-0. At 3:22 p.m., Marcus Reed walked out through the lobby with a box, and Ruth Delgado did not look up from her desk. And that was the part that got him, and he told his wife that night, and she didn't understand, and he couldn't explain it. At 4 p.m., Douglas Farron called Vivian Halloran. She was under a truck. Vivian, it's Doug. The board's voted. Marcus is out. We'd like you back Monday. Vivian slid out from under the truck on a creeper with a wrench in her hand and grease on her chin, and a 17-year-old holding a light for her. No, she said. I'm sorry. No, Doug. Vivian, we're reinstating you. I know. She sat up. And I'd take it, and I'd be good at it, and in about 4 years I'd be him. Or my dad. Or Marcus, which is the same thing with better manners. She wiped her hands on her jeans. I'm 34. I've got maybe one clean start in me, and I'm not spending it on a chair. Then what in God's name are you doing? Vivian looked at the underside of a 1989 Ford F-25. Oh. I'm learning, she said. At 4:04 p.m., she hung up, and Ethan Carter said, You just told a public company no. Yeah. How's it feel? Like I'm going to throw up. Yeah, Ethan said. That's the other disease. At 6:12 a.m. Day 9. Cleveland. The loading dock was cold, and the truck was on a trailer, and there were 400 people in a line outside a convention center at 6 in the morning because it had been on the news for 9 days. Maddie Carter said, Dad. Yeah. You're going to throw up. I'm not going to throw up. You threw up at my 9th grade thing. That was food poisoning. Dad? At 9:26 a.m., Peter Ostrander said, Mr. Carter, you're on in 4 minutes. It's 2200 in the hall, and there's an overflow room, and there's, He swallowed. There's 140 million people on the stream. Ethan Carter said, how many? 140. Vivian Halloran said, Mr. Carter, breathe. At 9:30 a.m., a 58-year-old maintenance man in clean gray coveralls with Carter stitched over the pocket walked onto the biggest stage in American energy, and 2,200 people stood up. He waited for it to stop. It took 90 seconds. He said, you can sit down. They sat down. He put his hands on the podium. My name is Ethan Carter, he said. 22 years ago, I worked on a program at a company called Halloran Dynamics. So did my wife. Her name was Grace Carter. She was a combustion chemist. She was better than me, and everybody who worked with her knew it. He looked at the room. In March of 2003, she solved continuous rotary detonation. Not me. Her. In May of 2004, she wrote a letter to the man who ran that company asking for permission to give it to the world, and he said no, because it was worth 11.4% of gross. He paused. She died in March of 2019. She never got to put her name on it. Nobody moved. For 6 years, Ethan said, I fixed the heat in that building. 2,200 people made a sound. 9 days ago, a woman called my truck garbage in a parking lot and 200 people laughed. Some of you have seen it. Apparently all of you have seen it. He almost smiled. That woman is in the 3rd row, and she's spent the last 6 days on the floor of my garage torquing bolts, and I'll get to her in a minute. Vivian Halloran put her hand over her mouth. I'm not going to talk long, Ethan said. I don't like talking. I'm going to show you a number, and then I'm going to make some noise, and then I'm going home. The screen behind him lit up. That's a dyno sheet, he said. It's from a cell in Youngstown, Ohio, 11 o'clock last night, independently witnessed by 3 people who don't like me. It's 4 hours and 11 minutes continuous. Pump gas, sea level, no exotic anything. He turned around and looked at it himself, like he still couldn't believe it. 31%, he said. Over the best thing you have. The hall did not applaud. That's the part everybody remembers. 2,200 people, and nobody clapped because half of them were engineers, and the other half were the people who paid engineers, and every single one of them understood in the same instant that everything they'd built their careers on had just been marked down. Somebody in the 4th row said out loud, "Bull." Ethan Carter said, "Yes, sir. That's fair." He walked to the edge of the stage. "Bring it in," he said. At 9:38 a.m., a rusted 1989 Ford F250 with a bracket welded to the fender came up the freight ramp and onto the stage of the North American Energy Summit, and the hall came apart. Ethan waited. He waited a long time. Then he said, "This truck's 37 years old. My wife bought it for $400 in '96. The body's junk. The frame's junk. The bed's got a hole in it you could put your arm through." He put his hand on the fender. "There's nothing wrong with the engine," he said. He got in, and 140 million people watched a man in gray coveralls sit down behind the wheel of the ugliest vehicle in the history of a keynote stage, and pause with his hand on the key and look up at nothing, and say 2 words that 1,000 people would freeze frame and argue about. And this time, the microphone caught it, and it was clean, and there was never any argument again. "Okay, Gracie." He turned the key, and the sound that came out of that thing was not a roar. It was a note. One single continuous, impossible note. Cathedral, low and organ clean, and it did not waver, and it did not miss. And 2,200 people felt it come up through the floor into their chests. And a man in the 4th row who had said "bull" 40 seconds earlier stood up with both hands on his head and just stayed like that. It ran for 2 minutes. Ethan Carter sat in the cab with both hands on the wheel and let them listen. At 9:41 a.m., a woman in the back of the hall started crying, and then it went through the room like weather. At 9:42, he shut it down. Clean. That long, smooth glide down into nothing. And in the silence, he leaned out the window and said, "That's my wife." At 9:44 a.m., the North American Energy Summit gave a standing ovation that lasted 11 minutes, and Peter Ostrander stopped trying to move the program, and the 11:15 slot was never filled. At 10:30 a.m., in a room behind the stage, 41 people wanted Ethan Carter's signature. He gave it to none of them. At 10:52 a.m., a man from a fund in Boston, a different man from the same fund 20 years later, and Ethan noticed that, and had to leave the room for a second, offered him $410 million. Ethan said, "For what?" "For the company." "There's no company." "Then for the patents." "There's no patents," Ethan said. "I published it this morning, 9:31. All of it. 411 pages open license, her name on every one." The man from Boston said, "You what?" At 10:53 a.m. Alan Voss, standing in the corner, laughed until he had to sit down. "You can't." The man's face had gone gray. "Mr. Carter, that's $40 billion you just—" "Yes, sir." "Why?" And Ethan Carter said, "Because that's what she asked for, in May of 2004, in writing, and a room full of grown men told her no, and she was right, and they were wrong, and I've had 22 years to think about which one of them I wanted to be." At 11:14 a.m., Vivian Halloran found him alone in a hallway with his back against the wall. "Mr. Carter?" "Ma'am." "You gave it away." "Yeah." "You gave away $40 billion. "I gave away her $40 billion, Ethan said. "It was never mine. I just built it." Vivian slid down the wall and sat next to him on the floor of a convention center, in a suit that cost more than his truck. They sat there a while. "I said no to the board," she said. "I heard. Doug called me twice." "You gonna take it?" "No." She stared at the far wall. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to do anything." "You torque a bolt okay." "I torque a bolt slow." "Yeah," he said. "You do." Vivian laughed, and it turned into something else halfway, and she put her face in her hands. "I called her garbage," she said. "Yep." In front of 200 people. And I laughed. "And I took your wrench and I threw it." "Yep." "Mr. Carter, how do I—" Her voice quit. She got it back. "There's no version of this where I fix that. There's no amount of anything. I've thought about it for 9 days and there's nothing I can do." And Ethan Carter said, "That's right." Vivian nodded. She'd known. She'd known, and she'd asked anyway. "Okay," she whispered. "Ma'am." "Yeah." "You want to know what Grace would have said?" Vivian couldn't look at him. "Yes." "She'd have said, 'You're not the first person to be wrong in a parking lot,'" Ethan said. "And then she'd have handed you a wrench and told you to shut up and hold the light." Vivian Halloran sat on the floor and cried in front of a man whose life her family had eaten, and he didn't tell her to stop, and he didn't comfort her either, and that was the mercy. At 11:31 a.m., he stood up. His knees popped. He held out his hand. She looked at it. "Come on," Ethan said. "There's 411 pages out there, and about 9,000 outfits that are going to try to build this by Friday, and 2/3 of them are going to blow up a test cell doing it. Somebody's got to teach them." "Who's somebody?" "Well," Ethan said, "Alan's 66. Maddie's got a chemistry final. I hate talking." Vivian Halloran took his hand. 14 months later, a woman with a callus on her right palm stood in a converted machine shop in Ohio in a shop coat with no name on it, and walked a room full of engineers from Boeing through an injector taper. And when a man in the back said, "And who exactly are you?" she said, "I'm the woman from the video." And the room laughed, and she laughed too, and that was the day she knew it was over. 2 years later, the first certified retrofit went on a regional freight aircraft out of Toledo and burned 31% less fuel than the airframe was built for, and the plate riveted inside the cowling. Read Grace Carter Cycle, 2003, and there was no company logo on it anywhere because there was no company. 3 years later, Richard Halloran died in a hospital in Columbus with his daughter holding his hand, and the last thing he said to her was, "I should have seconded it myself." And Vivian said, "I know, Dad." And he said, "Nobody would've." And she said, "I know." And he died about an hour after that, and she went back to work Monday because that's what he'd have wanted, and also because for the first time in her life, it was the thing she wanted too. Marcus Reed took a chief financial officer job at a mid-cap in Charlotte. He was very good at it. He was right about almost everything. He told the story at dinner parties for a while, the way a man tells a story he's still arguing with, and then he stopped telling it and nobody ever knew why. Alan Voss lived long enough to see it on ships. Maddie Carter graduated from Michigan with a degree in chemical engineering and a mother's handwriting taped inside her locker door, and at the ceremony, her father stood up in the third row, in a suit that didn't fit, and cried so hard, the man next to him offered him a handkerchief, and Ethan took it, and said thank you, and used it. And Ethan Carter never sold the truck. It sits in a garage behind a small house with a chain-link fence, 37 years old, going on 45 body junk frame, junk hole in the bed. You could put your arm through. People offer for it constantly. Museums have called. A man from Riyadh once wrote a number on a napkin and slid it across a kitchen table, and Ethan looked at it and slid it back and said, "It's not for sale, sir," in the exact same voice, because it was the same sentence, and it had always been true, and it had never once cost him anything to say it. Here's what the world got out of a bad Thursday in a parking lot. It got the engine for free forever with her name on it. And here's what Ethan Carter got, and it's the only thing he ever wanted for the rest of his life. When anybody anywhere said the words Carter Cycle, they were saying her name out loud. They laughed at a man for the truck he drove. They should have asked what he built.